The threshold of light, what Julian saw on the edge of eternity. The human brain weighs about 3 pounds. Yet it contains more mysteries than the deep ocean or the far reaches of the observable universe. For centuries, science and spirituality have fought a quiet, desperate war over a single, profound question: what happens to us in the final moments before we die? Among all the phenomena recorded by those who have walked to the very edge of the abyss and returned, one experience stands as a universal monolith across every culture, age, and background. The light, some call it the tunnel to heaven, others call it a neurochemical illusion born of a dying brain, but for Dr. Julian Vance, a neuroscientist whose life's work was dedicated to debunking the supernatural. The light was nothing more than a biological glitch, until the night his own heart stopped for 7 minutes and 42 seconds in a cold, sterile emergency room in Boston, Massachusetts. This is not just a story of survival. It is an exploration of the profound, scientifically documented and deeply harrowing reality of what awaits us at the threshold of death. Part I, the skeptic in the lab. To understand Julian Vance, you had to understand his obsession with the physical. Raised in Seattle, Washington by a strict, analytical father who was an aerospace engineer, Julian was taught early on that if something couldn't be measured, calculated, or replicated in a laboratory, it simply did not exist. By the time he was 35, Julian had earned his PhD from Harvard University in cognitive neuroscience and was leading a well-funded research team at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, his specific area of research. The neurochemistry of dying. We are organic computers, Julian would frequently tell his undergraduate students, his voice echoing in the sloped lecture halls. When you pull the plug on a computer, the monitor doesn't instantly go black. There is a residual surge of electricity. The pixels flare up one last time before fading into nothingness. The human brain is no different. The white light that people claim to see during near-death experiences, NDEs, isn't God opening a gate. It's anoxia, it's hypercapnia. It's a dying visual cortex throwing a final, chaotic tantrum. Julian had written numerous peer-reviewed papers published in the New England Journal of Medicine and Nature. He argued that when the heart stops pumping blood to the brain, oxygen levels plummet, anoxia, and carbon dioxide levels spike, hypercapnia. This triggers a massive, uncoordinated firing of neurons in the occipital lobe, the part of the brain responsible for processing vision. Because the visual cortex is arranged retinotopically, with a high concentration of cells dedicated to the center of your field of view, a massive burst of electrical activity naturally creates the illusion of a bright, central spot that expands outward. To the person dying, it feels like they are moving down a dark tunnel toward a blinding light. Furthermore, Julian attributed the feelings of profound peace and love often reported by NDE survivors to a massive flood of endorphins and ketamine-like chemicals released by the brain as a last-ditch defense mechanism against the trauma of death. He was a man who had successfully put the soul into a test tube and labeled it a byproduct of biology. He was utterly convinced of his own theories. He was safe in his certainty until October 14th. Part II, the crimson leaf. It was a classic New England autumn evening. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and burning wood. Julian was driving his Tesla Model S down Route 2, heading home to his suburban house in Concord after a grueling 14-hour day at the lab. The clock on his dashboard read 11:42 p.m. The road was slick from a light, freezing drizzle that had started an hour prior. Julian was thinking about a grant proposal due the following Monday, his mind entirely detached from his immediate surroundings. He never saw the deer. A massive white-tailed buck leapt from the darkness of the tree line directly into his headlights. Julian's instincts took over. He slammed on the brakes and jerked the steering wheel to the left. The car lost traction on a patch of black ice. The Tesla spun violently, spinning out of control across the median into the oncoming lane. Time seemed to dilate. a phenomenon Julian knew was caused by the amygdala logging memories at a higher density during a crisis. He watched helpless as a massive commercial flatbed truck traveling at 60 miles per hour barreled toward him. The impact was catastrophic. The truck plowed directly into the driver's side door. The sound of tearing metal and shattering safety glass was deafening, followed immediately by the suffocating deployment of airbags. The kinetic force fractured Julian's ribs, punctured his left lung, and caused a severe traumatic brain injury as his skull struck the side pillar. As the mangled wreckage of the car came to a rest in a ditch, Julian's heart, pushed beyond its limits by the trauma, went into ventricular fibrillation. It quivered uselessly like a handful of jelly. Blood stopped flowing to his organs. In his final moment of physical consciousness, Julian felt a cold, heavy darkness creeping in from the edges of his vision. "This is it," his inner monologue whispered, a detached scientific observation. "The oxygen deprivation is beginning. My visual cortex is about to misfire." Then the world vanished. Part III. The physics of the void. What happened next did not occur in a hospital, nor did it occur en route to. Julian found himself floating in a space that defied physical description. It was not dark in the sense of an empty room. It was a living, breathing void. He had no arms, no legs, and no weight, yet he was completely aware of his own identity. He was a point of consciousness suspended in an infinite sea of absolute silence. All the anxiety, the stress of his career, the grief of his mother's passing 3 years prior, and the physical agony of the car crash were completely gone. In their place was a sensation so profound that it made the concept of happiness seem trivial. It was a state of absolute, unconditional peace. Julian thought, his scientific mind still trying to operate within the void. This is the endorphin surge. My brain has released its stores of dynorphin and serotonin. Excellent. The evolutionary mechanism works perfectly, but then the void began to change. In the unimaginable distance, a pinpoint of light appeared. It was not white, nor was it yellow. It was a color that Julian had never seen before, a brilliant, iridescent hue that combined the purity of sunlight with the warmth of molten gold. The moment the light appeared, Julian felt a pull. It was not a physical tug, but a magnetic attraction of awareness. He began to move toward it, or rather, the light was expanding to engulf him. As he drew closer, Julian realized that his visual cortex theory was fundamentally flawed. This light wasn't a blurry, chaotic explosion of random neural firing. It had a structure. It had a geometry that seemed to exist in dimensions higher than the 3 he was accustomed to. It vibrated with a frequency that he could hear not with ears but with his entire being. It was a symphony of profound, resonant intelligence. Moreover, the light wasn't just bright, it was sentient. It radiated an intense, overwhelming wave of love, a love so fierce, so complete that it washed over Julian like a tidal wave. It knew everything about him. It knew his successes, his failures, his arrogance, and his secret fears. Yet, it judged nothing. It accepted him with an intimacy that exceeded any human relationship he had ever experienced. Within the light, Julian saw shapes forming. They were not ghosts or angels with wings, but beings of pure energy. And standing at the forefront of this luminous assembly was a figure he recognized instantly. It was Sarah. Sarah had been his laboratory assistant and his fiancée 6 years ago. She had died of an aggressive form of leukemia at the age of 29. Julian had watched her fade away, her body ravaged by chemotherapy until her heart finally gave out. Her death had been the catalyst that drove him to prove that there was nothing beyond the grave, because the alternative, that she was somewhere he couldn't reach, was too painful to bear. But here she was. She didn't look sick, she didn't look old. She was composed of the same golden light that permeated the entire realm, yet her essence, her unique sereness, was unmistakable. Julian, her voice echoed within his mind, carrying a warmth that made him feel entirely whole. "It's not your time, you have to go back." No, Julian thought desperately, trying to move closer to her. This is just a hallucination. You are a memory stored in my hippocampus. My brain is pulling up your image to comfort me as I die. You aren't real, Sarah smiled. It was a look of gentle amusement, the same look she used to give him when he got too pedantic during academic debates. If I am just a memory, Julian, then how do I know about the pocket watch? She asked. Julian paused. What pocket watch? The silver Waltham pocket watch your grandfather left you, the one you lost when you were 12. You thought you dropped it in the lake at your summer house in Maine. It's not in the lake, Julian. It's inside the false bottom of the old sea chest in your father's attic. Go look. Before Julian could process this information, the light began to contract. The immense feeling of love and warmth started to recede, replaced by a violent, rushing sensation. The symphony turned into a roar. Wait, Julian screamed into the void. Don't leave me here. You have to tell them, Julian. Sarah's voice faded, sounding like an echo down a long corridor. Tell them the light isn't the end, it's the beginning. Part IV, 7 minutes and 42 seconds, clear, thump. Julian's body jolted off the mattress of the trauma bed in the emergency department of Massachusetts General Hospital. Dr. Alan Sterling, the attending trauma physician and a longtime acquaintance of Julian, stared at the cardiac monitor. A flat, agonizing green line stretched across the screen, still in asystole. Charge again to 200 joules, give him another milligram of epinephrine, Sterling ordered, his face covered in sweat beneath his surgical mask. The nurses moved with practiced military precision. Julian had been brought in by paramedics who had performed CPR for 20 minutes in the ambulance. In the ER, his heart had stopped completely. They had been coding him for over 7 minutes. By all medical standards, even if they brought him back now, the lack of oxygen to his brain meant Julian would likely be a vegetable. Charged, the nurse called out. Clear. Sterling placed the paddles on Julian's chest and delivered the shock. The monitor beeped once, twice. Then, a chaotic rhythm emerged, stabilizing into a normal sinus tachycardia. We have a pulse, the nurse whispered, exhaling a breath she felt like she'd been holding for an hour. Blood pressure is coming up, 80/50. Sterling shone a penlight into Julian's eyes. The pupils were sluggish, but they reacted. Get him to the ICU. Let's see what's left of his brain when the sedation wears off. Part V, the awakening. Julian woke up 3 days later. The sensation of returning to a physical body was agonizing. It felt as though his consciousness was being forced into a suit made of lead and broken glass. Every breath was a struggle against the ventilator tube taped into his throat. His chest was an inferno of pain from the cracked ribs and the repeated defibrillator shocks, but his mind was crystal clear. When they finally extubated him, the first word that left his cracked lips was not a cry for water nor a question about his car. Sarah, he croaked. His father, Arthur Vance, who had flown in from Seattle and had been sitting vigil by his bedside, leaned forward, gripping his son's hand. Julian, it's me, it's Dad, you're in the hospital. You had a terrible accident. Julian blinked, looking around the sterile white room. The harsh fluorescent lights overhead were dim and ugly compared to the magnificent illumination he had just witnessed. He looked at his father, a man who, like him, lived by the laws of cold logic. Dad, Julian whispered, his voice trembling, the sea chest in the attic in Seattle. Arthur frowned, lines of worry deepening on his forehead. What, Julian, you're confused. You had a severe concussion, rest now. No, Julian tried to sit up, coughing violently as the monitors beeped erratically. Listen to me, the old sea chest in the attic. Is it still there? Yes, it's in the back corner behind the old suitcases. Why are you asking about that now? Go to the chest, Julian commanded, his eyes wide, burning with an intensity that startled his father. There is a false bottom, look inside it. Tell me what you find. Arthur, believing his son was suffering from post-traumatic delirium, merely nodded to placate him. Okay, Julian, I'll check it. Just calm down. 2 weeks later, Julian was discharged from the hospital. His physical recovery was nothing short of miraculous, but his psychological state had completely transformed. The man who used to spend his weekends reading neuroscience journals now sat by the window, staring out at the sky, silent and contemplative. He had taken an indefinite leave of absence from MIT. His colleagues whispered that the accident had broken his brilliant mind. One evening, Arthur returned to Julian's apartment in Boston after taking a flight back to Seattle to check on his property and collect some of Julian's childhood belongings. Arthur walked into the living room carrying a small cardboard box. His face was pale, his eyes wide with an expression Julian had never seen on his father's face before, absolute awe mixed with a deep, unsettling fear. Without saying a word, Arthur reached into the box and pulled out an object wrapped in a faded yellow handkerchief. He carefully unwrapped it and placed it on the coffee table in front of Julian. It was a silver Waltham pocket watch. Julian picked it up. He turned it over in his hand. On the back, the initials E.V. Edward Vance, his grandfather, were elegantly engraved. It was tarnished but intact. "It was exactly where you said it was," Arthur said, his voice shaking. "In the false bottom of the sea chest, Julian. You haven't been in that attic since you were 10 years old. Your grandfather died when you were 12. You told us you lost this watch at the lake house that summer." "How did you know it was there?" Julian looked up at his father, tears welling in his eyes. "Because Sarah told me," Arthur stepped back. "Sarah is dead, Julian." "I know," Julian replied softly. "But she was there, in the light." Part VI, the search for meaning. The discovery of the pocket watch shattered Julian's materialistic worldview. As a scientist, he knew that a hallucination cannot provide new, accurate data about the physical world that the subject did not previously possess. He had never known the watch was in that chest. His brain could not have manufactured that information from a hidden memory, because the information had never been entered into his brain to begin with. This was verifiable, empirical proof that his consciousness had existed outside his body during those 7 minutes and 42 seconds. Driven by a new, far more profound obsession, Julian did not return to his old research. Instead, he pivoted his entire career toward investigating the cross-cultural and neurobiological anomalies of near-death experiences. He used his credentials to gain access to medical records, interviewing hundreds of patients across the United States who had survived clinical death. What he discovered was an astonishing consistency that defied statistical probability. Whether he interviewed a Wall Street investment banker in New York, a soybean farmer in Iowa, or a retired schoolteacher in Miami, the core elements of the experience remained identical. Julian categorized the findings into several distinct phases, matching them against known scientific phenomena to see where biology ended and the inexplicable began. 1. The separation, out-of-body experience. Over 80% of the survivors Julian interviewed reported a sensation of leaving their physical bodies. They described floating near the ceiling of the emergency room or the operating theater, looking down at their own corpses. From a purely scientific perspective, Julian knew that stimulating the right temporoparietal junction (TPJ) in the brain can induce an out-of-body experience. However, the TPJ theory failed to explain veridical perception instances where patients accurately described specific events, conversations, or medical instruments used while they were clinically dead, flatlined, and unconscious. One patient, a 42-year-old construction worker from Chicago named Marcus, had flatlined during open-heart surgery. Marcus told Julian that while he was above his body, he noticed a piece of chewing gum stuck to the top of the surgical light fixture. Along with a specific serial number printed on top of the machine, details that were entirely invisible from the floor. Julian checked with the hospital's maintenance staff. The chewing gum and the serial number were exactly where Marcus said they were, too. The tunnel and the darkness, the transition from the physical world to the next realm, almost always involved a movement through darkness. Some described it as a tunnel, others as a valley, a staircase, or a vast, empty expanse. Julian's old papers had attributed this to tunnel vision caused by a drop in blood pressure to the retina. But the patients didn't describe it as a loss of peripheral vision. They described it as a dynamic, high-speed journey. They felt themselves moving at incredible velocities, not with panic but with anticipation. 3. The light. This was the apex of the experience. The light was never described merely as an illumination like a bright lamp or the sun. It was invariably described as an entity of love. Julian dug into the historical and cultural records. He found that the phenomenon of the light was not unique to modern Americans with access to advanced resuscitation technology. In the Tibetan Book of the Dead, written centuries ago, the dying are told to move toward the clear light of the void. Plato, in the 10th Book of the Republic, recounts the story of a soldier who died in battle and came back to life on his funeral pyre. Described a magnificent light that held the structure of the universe together. Hieronymus Bosch, the 15th-century Dutch painter, created a masterpiece titled Ascent of the Blessed, which depicts souls being guided through a dark, tubular tunnel toward a blinding, glorious white light at the far end. How could a biological glitch remain so perfectly uniform across thousands of years, across completely disparate cultures, religions, and eras? If it were merely random neural firing, the hallucinations should be chaotic and highly individualized, one person seeing a kaleidoscope of shapes, another seeing fire, another seeing nothing. Instead, humanity saw the exact same light. 4. The life review. Within the light, many patients experienced a panoramic life review. They didn't just remember their lives, they relived them in a matter of seconds. A fascinating detail emerged from Julian's interviews. During the life review, people did not experience their actions from their own perspective alone. They experienced the effects of their actions on others. A wealthy businessman from Boston told Julian, "I saw a time when I had cruelly fired an employee to save a few dollars on a budget. In the light, I didn't just watch the memory, I became that employee. I felt his humiliation, his panic about how he would feed his children, the knot of despair in his stomach. The light didn't punish me. It just held me in love and allowed me to feel the ripple effect of my own choices." Part VII, the neurochemical conflict. Julian knew that the scientific community would not accept testimonies alone. He needed to look at the brain data. In 2023, a groundbreaking study published in Frontiers in Aging Neuroscience had accidentally captured the brain activity of an 87-year-old patient who died of a heart attack while connected to an electroencephalogram (EEG) machine. The data revealed something extraordinary. For about 30 seconds before and after the heart stopped beating, there was a massive surge in gamma brain waves. Gamma waves are the highest frequency brain waves typically associated with intense cognitive processing, high-level information integration, meditation, and vivid dreaming. When a person is highly focused or experiencing a moment of creative genius, their brain shows bursts of gamma activity. Why would a dying, oxygen-starved brain suddenly exhibit a level of coordinated, high-frequency electrical activity that exceeded its waking state? The materialist scientists argued that this was the death surge, a final, desperate dump of neurochemicals as the cellular membranes broke down, causing a massive release of calcium that triggered a temporary wave of electricity. They claimed this hyperactivation accounted for the vividness of the light and the intensity of the life review, but Julian saw it differently. To him, the EEG data was proof that death was not a passive slide into unconsciousness but an active, highly organized transition. The brain wasn't breaking down, it was shifting gears. It was unlocking a higher state of consciousness that is normally suppressed by our physical senses. During our daily lives, our brains act as a reducing valve. The physical organs, our eyes, ears, and nerves, filter out 99% of the reality surrounding us so that we can focus on survival in a physical world. If we could see all the electromagnetic radiation, hear all the frequencies, and perceive all the dimensions around us at once, we wouldn't be able to function. The brain doesn't produce consciousness, Julian wrote in his new manuscript, a book that would turn his former peers against him. The brain transmits consciousness, acting like a radio receiver. When the radio is damaged or turned off, the broadcast doesn't cease to exist. The consciousness simply returns to its source. The light is the source. Part VIII, the final lecture. It was 5 years after his accident. Julian stood once again in a lecture hall, but this time it wasn't at MIT, and he wasn't teaching undergraduates about biological determinism. He was speaking at a global conference on consciousness studies in Austin, Texas. The room was packed with doctors, physicists, psychologists, and journalists. On the large screen behind him, he displayed 2 images side by side. On the left was an image of a dying star, a supernova, ejecting its outer layers into a brilliant, expanding ring of light. On the right was an image of a human neuron, its axons stretching out like cosmic filaments, glowing under a high-powered microscope. The similarity was uncanny. For the first half of my life, Julian began, his voice calm, resonant, and filled with an unshakable conviction. I believed that the light people saw before death was a beautiful lie told by a dying brain. I believed it was a trick of biology designed to soften the blow of annihilation. The audience was dead silent. But science requires us to follow the data no matter where it leads, even if it leads us out of our comfort zones. When we look at the phenomenon of veridical perception, where people see things while flatlined that they couldn't possibly know, the biological explanation falls apart. When we look at the absolute uniformity of the light across history, geography, and culture, the theory of random neural misfiring falls apart. He stepped out from behind the podium, walking closer to the edge of the stage. What is the light? Based on my research and my own personal experience, the light is the boundary layer between 2 different states of existence. It is the energetic manifestation of a higher dimensional reality. Think of a caterpillar. To a caterpillar, the chrysalis represents the end of the world. It is dark, it is confining, and its body literally dissolves into a chaotic soup. If a caterpillar had a brain like ours, it would conclude that it was dying, that its existence was over. But we, looking from the outside, know better. We know that the dissolution of the caterpillar is necessary for the manifestation of the butterfly. Human death is a chrysalis. The physical body fails, the brain starves, and the reducing valve opens. The surge of gamma waves we see on the EEG isn't the brain throwing a tantrum. It is the consciousness breaking through the shell of the physical form. The light we see is the first glimpse of the wider, grander universe to which we truly belong. Julian paused, looking out into the crowd. He saw tears in the eyes of many. He saw skepticism in others. He welcomed both. We do not need to fear the dark, he concluded, because the dark is just a tunnel. And at the end of every tunnel, there is a light that knows your name, a light that forgives your mistakes, and a light that welcomes you home. Epilogue. The view from the bridge after the conference, Julian walked out onto the Congress Avenue Bridge in Austin. The sun was setting over Lady Bird Lake, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange, pink, and violet. A cool breeze swept across the water. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the silver Waltham watch. He opened the clasp, watching the steady, rhythmic ticking of the second hand. He knew that his time on this earth was temporary. His physical body would eventually grow old, or another accident would claim it, and he would once again find himself flatlining on a hospital bed. But the fear that had dictated his early career, the terrifying belief that death was a black void of nothingness, had been permanently erased. He looked at the setting sun, its rays reflecting off the water, creating a brilliant, shimmering path of golden light that stretched across the lake. Julian smiled. He closed the watch, slipped it back into his pocket, and walked forward into the evening, completely at peace with the mystery of what lay ahead.